Hi everyone, welcome back to geometry class. Today we're going to be talking about midpoint in the coordinate plane. We'll be in chapter 1, section 6 of your textbook, so turn to page 43 and follow along with your notebook. So today, at the end of this video, you will be able to answer the following questions. What is the midpoint formula? And how do you find the location of a midpoint or a second endpoint on the coordinate plane? So let me start today by giving you an example. Let's say you are at Springwoods High School and your friend is at Burger King, and you two want to meet halfway in between the two locations. So you decide to start traveling towards your friend, and your friend starts traveling towards you. Well, when you get exactly halfway, you've traveled the same distance that your friend has traveled. So the point that you meet at is called the midpoint. Okay, so today we're going to find how to find the location of this midpoint. Before we move on, let's do a little review. So point A, where you start, and point B, where your friend starts, can be endpoints along a line segment, which I've expressed here, point A and point B, with point M being the midpoint halfway, exactly halfway between the two endpoints. Remember, I have tick marks to tell me that segment AM is congruent to segment MB, which I've expressed here. Okay, so remember, a midpoint cuts a segment into two equal halves. So exactly what we've shown here. I can also replace the words cuts a segment into two halves with the word bisects. A midpoint is a point that bisects a segment or cuts it in half. Okay. So the space we're going to be working with today is the coordinate plane. Now remember, the coordinate plane has a y-axis and an x-axis, and I can plot points. And the points are given a location by their x-axis and their x-coordinate and their y-coordinate. So to find the location of point A here, I'll count from the origin along the x-axis first, 1, 2, 3. So the x-coordinate is 3. And along the y-coordinate, y-axis next, 1, 2. So the ordered pair, the location of point A, is 3, the x-coordinate first, and 2, the y-coordinate next. Okay, but we're going to be working with line segments on the coordinate plane. So we have our line segment here, CD. C is an endpoint, and D is our other endpoint. And what we want to find is the location of the midpoint along this line segment. Okay, so step 1 to find the midpoint is to find and label the coordinates of our endpoints. Again, our endpoints are C and D. So to find the coordinates of C, I'm again going to start at the origin and count along the x-axis, 1, and along the y-axis, 1. So my coordinates of point C are 1, 1. Great. So the same thing to find the coordinates of D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is our x-coordinate. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is our y-coordinate. Great. So we found the coordinates of our endpoints. Now let's label the coordinates of our endpoints. What I mean by label is I want a way to distinguish between point C and point D. So I've given the x and y coordinate of point C the little number 1 to say this is my first point. Okay? The same thing for point D, but since it's my second point, I've given it a little number 2. x2 and y2 to show the coordinates of that point. Great. Okay, the second step, actually the last step to calculate the midpoint, is to calculate the coordinates of our midpoint. But before we do that, I want us to visualize something. To move from point C to point D, we had to travel along the x-axis. So the x-coordinate of the midpoint should be halfway along this path, or halfway between x1 and x2. So to calculate xm, what I'm going to do is take the average of my x1 and x2 values. Okay? The same thing for my y-coordinate of my midpoint. I've traveled along the y-axis to get from point C to point D, or my midpoint is going to be, my y-coordinate of my midpoint is halfway between y1 and y2. And to find the value of ym, I'm also going to take the average of y1 and y2. Okay, well together, the average of the x coordinates and the average of the y coordinates make the midpoint formula. So right now, go ahead and pause this video and write the midpoint formula down in your notes. Great. Okay, now we're going to use the midpoint formula to calculate the location of our midpoint. So what I've done here is I'm using the midpoint formula to plug in my values and find the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate of my midpoint. So I'm taking the values that I've labeled previously, 1 plus 5, and divided by 2 as the average. And 3 is the x value, x-coordinate of my midpoint. Likewise, I'm going to take the value of y1, add it to y2, and divide by 2, the average of my y values. 1 plus 5 divided by 2, which is also 3. So the x and y coordinates of my midpoint are 3, 3. Okay, so we found our midpoint. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that is exactly where our midpoint is. Congratulations, guys. You've just figured out how to find the location of a midpoint on the coordinate plane. Okay, one last example before we close out for today. What if you were at Springwoods High School again, and your friend is halfway between Springwoods and Burger King at the midpoint, but we don't know the location of Burger King? So what we're going to do right now is find how to find the location of a second endpoint when we know our first endpoint and the location of our midpoint. Okay, so we have another line segment here, our first endpoint D and our midpoint M. Okay, so to find the location of the second endpoint, our first step, again, is to find and label the coordinates of the known endpoint, D, and our midpoint, M. Okay, so D is at 1, 1, 2, so it's at 1, 2, and M is at 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 4, 5. And now again, I'm going to label D, so I'm going to label D x1, y1 this time because it's my first endpoint, and then M, I'm labeling xm, ym because it's my midpoint. Great. Okay, my second step is to calculate the distance between the first endpoint and the midpoint along each axis. And what I want you to visualize is the distance I have to travel along the x-axis from the first endpoint to the midpoint. So I've traveled 1, 2, 3 units along the x-axis to get from D to M. Okay, now let's do the distance along the y-axis. 1, 2, 3. I've also had to travel 3 units along the y-axis. Great, so that's step 2. I've also shown this algebraically. I can show the distance is also the difference between the x-coordinate of my midpoint and the x-coordinate of my first endpoint, xm minus x1, which is 4 minus 1, or 3, which we also found by counting. The same thing along our y-axis, ym minus y1, which is 5 minus 2. We're getting these values from our labeled coordinates, which is also 3. So the same thing. This is also step 2. I'm just showing you how to do this algebraically. Okay, and step 3, our last step. What I want us to do is add the distance from step 2 to each coordinate of our midpoint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take our coordinate of our midpoint, our x-coordinate, and add that to the distance we found in step 2. So 4 is the x value of my midpoint. I'm adding that to 3, which is our distance from step 2. So 4 plus 3 is 7. So 7 is the x-coordinate of my second endpoint. Great. We're going to do the same thing for our y values, our y-coordinate. Ym plus the distance traveled along the y-axis, 5 plus 3 equals 8. So the coordinates of my second endpoint are 7, 8. Perfect, guys. And that goes right here. Fantastic. So in review, we've used the midpoint formula to find the location of the midpoint on the coordinate plane and to find the location of a second endpoint on the coordinate plane. Great job today, guys. See you next time.